It's Friday, January 31st. I'm Jamie Fitzpatrick in for Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Have you ever had a dream to pick up a camera and tell stories on film? Well, today's guests didn't want to just dream about it. They're already making movies and showing them too. Can it really be that easy? We'll find out. So today's show is all about film creativity and getting more ambitious young folks behind the camera. If you want to join the conversation, there's always lots of ways to do it, and we always collect your emails and messages, and we'll air them on a future show. You can send a text to 709-327-8206. You can send an email to thesignal@cbc.ca. And you can leave a voicemail at 709-576-5260. We're going to hear from a variety of guests today, and several of them are associated with Brain Food Studios in St. John's. It's a nonprofit that teaches young people the skills and art of filmmaking. And we're going to start there. Mark Murphy is the founder and operator of Brain Food Studios. Thanks for coming in.
No problem. And you know what? You and 90% of people who meet me and don't even know my brother's name is Mark have called me Mark. Matt Murphy.
I will take the hit for that because the script in front of me says Matt Murphy. I'm the guy who changed it to Mark.
I've been answering to Mark my whole life, so it's I'm used to it. But yeah, no, I'm Matt Murphy, founder, owner, operator of Brain Food Studios. I say former teacher, but anyone who's ever taught knows that you never stop being a teacher. And so that kind of was one of the seeds that was planted about a year and a half ago that brought about Brain Food Studios. That and an enthusiasm for media education and just creating content and just having an expressive art form where, you can be a bit silly and be different characters. And so I wanted to share that with that enthusiasm and passion with younger kids. And so that's what brought about Brain Food Studios.
And thanks for dropping in, Matt, and my apologies.
Oh, thank you.
Still with Brain Food Studios, Brooklyn Cox, a high school student, also a filmmaker, and you're already a coach at the studio. You know enough to show everyone else the ropes?
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, it's really fun to be a part of. It's really cool to see all these younger kids come up with all these ideas on their own, and then just to be able to help bring them to life is even better.
So before we go much further, we should, first of all, tell people that a lot of these ideas are going to be on screen and available for viewing on the 13th of February. Brooklyn, tell me about that event.
Yeah, that's a horror film screening I put together about a month ago. It's happening at Magic Storm Events up by the Avalon Mall. It'll be at 7 p.m. on February 13th. It features 6 short films from Canadian filmmakers, and I think it's going to be a really fun time.
Horror film, little mini horror films festival on the eve of Valentine's Day. Perfect. Huh?
Yes.
I know that, Brooklyn, you have a film in it.
I do.
Tell me about it.
The film I have is called Shutter Up. I helped direct it, and it's about a young photographer who has his 2 friends over for an evening of doing some Christmas photo shoots with his friends. And he believes that art is everything, and he gets quite upset when his friends aren't on time or doing what he says.
And things possibly take an unexpected turn?
Yep.
It sounds like it sounds so innocent, a nice Christmas photo shoot. What could possibly go wrong?
I don't know.
Had to watch the film to find out, right?
Yep.
Tell me how the screening that you're doing on the 13th, how did that come about? Is this your brainchild?
Actually, it happened in one of my social studies classes. I have to do career hours, and one of my teachers was talking about doing stuff for certain types of charities. And I had all my career hours done already, but I always liked helping people any way I could. So while he was talking about that, I was coming up with an idea, and it's I love film, I love helping people, so I was like, why not I try to put together a small film thing? So I ended up messaging someone from Grindmind to get some advice, and he directed me over to Magic Storm Events, and within an hour, I had a venue. So it's pretty cool.
Matt, you must be pretty proud of people like Brooklyn and other students who've come through the studios. It sounds like this is what you want to get done, right? You want to get people making films and get it out into the community.
100%. Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's a fantastic art form, and art always kind of needs and deserves an audience. I want to be clear, though, that this was not a Brain Food Studios initiative. This was Brooklyn taking her own initiative to do this thing. And as soon as I heard about it, I was like, how can I help? What can I do? Brain Food Studios are going to be a sponsor. We're going to cover your concessions so that, you can raise as much money as you can for the cause, which was the Janeway Children's Hospital. So all proceeds that come from the door and the concessions will go to the Janeway. So, I mean, Brooklyn and I actually met when I was teaching science in Mount Pearl. I was, like I said, I was a former teacher, but you'll never stop being a teacher. So I taught Brooklyn science in grade 9. And that's where we kind of discovered, oh, she's a really talented and passionate filmmaker. And I was kind of exploring filmmaking at the same time. So when Brain Foods got off the ground, I reached out and I said, I'd love for you to be one of our coaches. And when I found out that she was doing this, I was like I said, had to be as big of a support as I could possibly be, but still letting her run absolutely everything so that it still remains her project and her like I said, brainchild. But I'm just there to support in any way that I possibly can, because I think it's a fantastic initiative.
So you have this studio that you set up specifically to introduce young people to film and video making, and they're already racing out ahead of you and doing their own thing.
It's exactly right. Yeah, and that's that's the goal of any teacher, is to watch your students surpass you.
What about, does everybody come to the studio interested in making horror movies?
It's funny because our student body is ages 10 plus. And so most of them are 10, 11, 12 years old. But yes, they still have a tendency towards the macabre. In our most recent project, we actually had to say, all right, we're not going to make horrors this time. As much as we like to put everything in their hands,
you just wanted a little variety.
It was boys, let's not kill everyone on screen this time, right? Let's have a happy ending. Let's get away from tragedy. Let's create something a little bit more wholesome this time, and then maybe next time we'll get back to the something a little bit darker. But they do like to explore those darker themes, and it's our job to allow them to explore those things in a safe and productive and appropriate environment. So there are times where an idea gets floated and we kind of have to reel it in and say, that's a little bit too far, but what if we did this? So unlike improv, in those moments where it's always yes and, we embrace that as much as possible, but in those moments it's never no, it's always no but, right? And so we want to try and get them to be the creative driving force in all aspects, from the initial conceptualization of an idea to the very final edit. And they're involved in the entire process.
Okay. We'll talk more about horror films as we go, seeing as how that's the theme of the day and the theme of the screening that you have coming up on the 13th. Want to bring in a couple more people now. James Newhook, also a coach at Brain Food Studios, a filmmaker from Placentia, and he's with us in the studio. Hi.
Hey, glad to be here.
So what do you have in the festival? I'm going to call it a festival. It's a one-night screening, but what do you have in the event?
So my film that's at the event, it's my final film that I made. I did the filmmaking program out in Stephenville, so shout out to Peter, shout out to Keith out there. But my final film is called Lady Number 16. So I did that back in 2022 when I graduated. It's a ghost story based off a Dale Jarvis ghost tale. So it's about these sailors in the 1800s come in, help this lady who's locked out of her house. They let her in. And then they returned later to find out, things were not all that they seemed, and they were visited by a ghost. So I was approached by Brooklyn. She said she wanted to make this horror film festival, but she was just reaching out to many different people with ideas for horror films. So I said, by all means, throw my film in. It was for a good cause. My film's gone through the film festival circuit. It's available online. You can view it on my website, jamesnewhook.ca, but it's also... it was also here in St. John's at the Nichols, at the Smith Sound in Clarenville. It was also at Fogfest, run by Grindmind. So It's gone through its whole cycle, but the fact that it can now be used for charity, I think that says a lot, and I'm very, very happy to have it in there. I'm so happy.
Okay, also joining us is Lisa Ovies. She's on the line from Los Angeles, a director who also works to help other female identifying aspiring directors get their films made. Hello.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I guess some people listening to the radio right now might wonder, okay, why did we suddenly call someone who's on the other side of the continent? But you've already made, you've been here and you've made connections here in terms of young filmmakers, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I just saw James's film at Fogfest, and it was fantastic. And I met Brooklyn in Newfoundland, in St. John's. I've met Brooklyn multiple times, actually.
I'm sure you've seen and you've traveled and you've seen short films and you've met filmmakers in a variety of locations. What did you make of the scene here when you got here and started to make these people, meet these young people who are making their own movies?
Honestly, I've been very privileged to travel all over the world in film, and there is something incredibly special about St. John's, and I do not just say that because I'm talking to you guys. I have made an active choice to go back multiple times since the first time there only a year and a half ago. There's so much talent. There's so much passion. I just think the environment lends to some fantastic ghosty, spooky stories, so maybe that's also why my heart is there. But so much talent and passion, and I think people like Brooklyn are our future. And the fact that people like Brooklyn are so vocal about what they want and looking for opportunity and creating great films, like, I just want to be a part of it as much as I can.
Tell me a little bit more about, I guess we call your mandate, about what your passion is when it comes to working in film and helping other people get their films made.
Well, I am a director and a writer in film, which is obviously a very male-dominated industry, and then I work mainly in horror, the subgenre, which is even more male-dominated. And I did start noticing that there is, while it is not everyone, a fair amount of gatekeeping in certain genres. And I also was meeting a lot of women outside of the festival circuit or screenings that consistently said they wanted to make film, but they weren't necessarily feeling that they were invited or that they were getting the opportunity to learn. So after several years of being one of the only women in the room, I started realizing we needed to create a space where they were supported, where they were invited, where we could build community. And so I launched a company and a program called Empower Her, which is an online film program designed to get female identifying and non-binary filmmakers behind the camera and to hopefully get more diverse stories out there.
Is it correct that in the screening that Brooklyn has organized for a couple of weeks from now that you have a piece in there as well?
Absolutely. I was so excited when Brooklyn reached out. My first concern was most of what I do is fairly dark, and I didn't know if it would be appropriate, but the film that she picked of mine that is playing is called Sleep Tight. It actually played, I want to say, the first year I met Brooklyn at Fogfest, and it's something that's really important to me because I also think that film, specifically the genre of horror, there is a lot of social responsibility for us as filmmakers, and it allows me to access an audience I might not always access with the opportunity to speak on topics that are really important to me. So this one is it's a story about domestic violence and generational trauma told through the lens of a horror film.
I want to keep you on the line for a couple more minutes, if that's okay, while we talk a little bit
Absolutely.
about horror films. James, what do you think makes for a good horror film, thriller, scary movie, whatever we want to call them? There's an art to it, obviously, and there's an art to the tension that builds, all the rest of it. What do you think the key is?
I think it's just about having, a bit of fun, not going with the expected, just being very creative with how it goes. I do think there's a lot of planning that goes into it, and obviously you're talking with like the supernatural, for some of the horror films, blood and gore and all this sometimes, and then sometimes it's just, scary suspense, It comes down to, just having that itch that needs to be scratched that for a lot of people it's horror films, I think. So, yeah.
Brooklyn, what have you learned about making horror movies in your experience? Because if there is going to be some blood and some gore, if you're going to make a slasher flick, you can't just get everyone in a room and kill them. That's not a story. So what do you think the key is to doing a good one?
Well, I've always been a bigger fan of like psychological horror, so like where it like messes with your mind more, because I never was like for the slasher stuff. Like I never cared for gore and stuff like that. But if you do a slasher film, you really need like a really good story. Like any film can have a good story, but I feel like for a slasher film, you need a very like story that keeps people from the beginning, or else I feel like it won't do too well, depending on the type of person. There's a lot of people who really love slasher films, but then there's people who are more for psychological, then there's people who don't like horror at all. So I think it really depends on the person, but story is definitely what I think is the best for that stuff.
Is story the most essential part of a psychological horror film as well, or are the rules a little different, do you think?
To me, it's just the story. Story and sound, I feel, are the two most important things, because if you don't have a very good sound and you still have a good story, it's still hard to follow along. Same thing with lighting, I feel. But like story is always like top for me.
Okay. Matt, I wonder what you'd say about this. When most of us think about horror films that we've seen, we'll tend to remember the parts that made us jump or made our blood run cold. But those are just like the peak moments, right? So what do you tell students when they're asking you about making a good horror film and how they make it really work so that you really have the audience on a string?
Well, one of the permeating themes throughout all of our filmmaking classes when we're trying to pull the ideas out of their brains and turn it into a screenplay is this old adage of show, don't say, right? Show, don't tell, meaning show the people, the audience, what is happening rather than narrating or through exposition. And so it's a lot more impactful now. But with horror, like Brooklyn just alluded to, sometimes like it's what you don't show that really allows the imagination to run wild. Some of the best horror movies I've ever seen, and the ones that stick with me, are the ones that you don't see the monster. I mean, you go back, 10, 15 years, maybe more than that, but like when the Blair Witch Project came out and there was all these found footage motif films coming out, Cloverfield. It wasn't until like the very end of the film where you got like a glimpse of what was actually the threat. The Blair Witch Project, you'd never see it, right? So how do you keep people engaged and kind of continue to dangle? You got that stick and carrot, but you never really see the carrot, but you know it's there. Right? So your imagination kind of fills in the blanks, and that's some of the most impactful things that I think you can do for an audience is allow their imagination to run wild along with the storyteller.
Lisa, can I have some thoughts from you on this? What do you think makes a story, makes a film really work?
Well, I mean, in horror and elsewhere, I'm going to agree with everything everyone said, but to reiterate with Brooklyn and sound, I think sound specifically in horror and a thriller is so pivotal, and the moments of silence and tension are able to build a space and an emotional reaction for the audience. I think the visual ride you take them on is something very visceral, but you can manipulate so much with sound in a way that the audience isn't always as mindful. So with things like A Quiet Place, we have these films where an entire audience is holding their breath, and I think that's incredibly powerful. And like Brooklyn said, bad sound can ruin a good movie, but I also think character. If you care about a character or you're invested in them, everything that happens to them feels so much more impactful.
You mentioned earlier that one of your missions, I guess we'd say, is to mentor young women who are making films, and you are a horror film director. You also mentioned that's a male-dominated field. Do you find that women making horror films bring a different kind of perspective? Are the stories slightly different?
Absolutely. I do. I mean, look at the substance and what it's doing right now. I think we've lived a different experience. We have a different lens. But one of the best questions I got that I hadn't even thought of as a 45-year-old woman, I was in a documentary a few years ago that actually brought me out to Newfoundland for the very first time. And the woman that was interviewing us was interviewing female directors. And she said, "Do you think you guys have a different relationship with blood because you bleed every month?" And I went, "Oh my God, I would have never thought of that in my entire life." But I think we've just experienced pain and fear in a different way. And so it's almost cathartic for us to be able to feel these things in a safe environment and to be able to express ourselves. So I think innately our films will be very different.
Now, I'm going to ask you this because it's right on the tip of my tongue, but it won't come to me. There's a recent film in which the main character is a new mother who we suspect is starting to turn into a dog.
Night Bitch.
Thank you. If we, thanks for confirming that for me. If we look at films like The Substance and Night Bitch, where the point of view is more female, I've heard people refer to those films as body horror. And body horror must be different coming from a female perspective than a male's for the reasons you just mentioned and for a whole bunch of other reasons, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, we aren't limited to just doing body horror, but I think so much of being a woman is a challenge in the body that we're given. And the fact that, we are the only species outside of probably a praying mantis that is required to mate with our predators. So we live in a space where our body is part of our fear. But also Night Bitch, I want to give huge credit to the way that they chose to write the male character. I think that we are being alienated as female writers with our rage because constantly everyone's saying, "Oh, you're mad at men, men are the villain." The way Night Bitch was written was so visceral through her experience and so truthful. But I loved that the husband was just a human who was fallible. We're all fallible. He was not a villain. And the entire way that those two were able to grow together, I thought was a very beautiful and truthful story. And I think people need to take a step back, ideally, and allow the idea that we're not just angry. We've just had a lot of lived experience that we need to get out.
Thanks a lot for joining us for part of this conversation today. Do you think we'll be seeing you back here anytime soon?
I would absolutely love that. We have been giving out a scholarship once a year through FogFest, run by Grind Mind, and I was able to come out last summer to curate an entire film block of female-directed shorts, and I do believe that I will be coming back again for FogFest in November, if not sooner.
That's terrific. Thanks again.
Thank you so much for your time in Brooklyn. Congratulations on everything. You are amazing.
Thank you.
That is Lisa Ovies. She's on the line from Los Angeles, a horror film director who has some close connections now with the film scene here in Newfoundland and Labrador. It was great to hear from her. I want to talk a little bit more about how film creativity, especially as it's done in education with young people, fits a bit more into the whole creative community here. But before we get to that, I was just talking with Lisa. She mentioned The Substance and Night Bitch, which were a couple of recent films. So, James, I'm going to start with you. What are right off the top of your head, what are your favorite horror movies?
Well, I'm not as versed in horror, but I love, Silence of the Lambs. That's one of my favorites. I know that's not necessarily a horror film, but it's got that suspense to it and that drama and the anticipation of the kill. But just so many of the local horror films are the ones that I paid the most attention to because they've got so much creativity, they got so much passion put into them, and they're the ones that I like to pay attention to the most because I know most of the guys there, and if I don't know them, there's always that connection. So I'm always happy to support local independent films, independent horror, and yeah, that's what I like to pay attention to most.
And people are doing great work. You would encourage everyone to get out and see it?
Absolutely. I think it's great. Film's a great medium to express yourself, communicate with others, work together as a team behind the camera, but as well when you're in front of the camera, it's a great way to be someone you're not as well. Horror films especially, most scenarios you wouldn't even be able to experience in real life, right? I want to be the person that has the knife that's stabbing someone sometimes, right? And you can't do that without being in front of the camera.
Right.
So it gives
And
great...
without having the correct knife.
I guess.
Yeah, the prop.
Yeah, a prop, yes.
Brooklyn, what are some of your favorites? What inspires you?
My favorite movie of all time is the Child's Play 2 movie with Chucky.
Right.
I'm a really big fan of the whole Chucky franchise, the Child's Play 1 and 2 movies, and then the Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky, all those. And then you got the show. I've always been right into it. And anytime I tell someone that my favorite movie is that, they're like, isn't that just a killer doll? It was like, yes, but I don't know, the story of it is so good that it just keeps going. So even when it starts to feel like it's dragging on a bit, something new happens that kind of shocks you and it keeps you in. And I don't know, I've always enjoyed those movies for a while. Other than that, they're not really horror movies, but Prisoners and Zodiac, they're more thriller, but I think they're really good films. And Zodiac is 2 hours. Actually, I think it's close to 3. And I'm not able to usually watch movies that long because I lose interest. But the way that it was so well executed, and the dialogue was good, the characters you enjoyed watching them on screen. So, yeah, those are probably my favorite films.
Matt, at Brain Food Studios, you have young students, young people coming through who want to learn filmmaking, want to make their own films. You've to help them tell the stories that they want to tell. I don't even know if you like horror movies, do you?
It's not the genre that I would go to, but I mean, who doesn't love a good scare now and then, right?
Do you have a favorite?
I absolutely have a couple of favorites. I was always a big fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. When I think about what are my favorite horror movies, it's the ones that kind of keep me awake at night. And of course, that one intrinsically has that sort of, don't go to sleep sort of motif. But one that I always kind of keep coming back to is The Witch. And it's one of those movies where you don't see the antagonist. I don't think at all. Without giving too much away for anyone who hasn't seen it, there is an ever-present sort of manifestation or a personification of the evil, but you don't realize it until the very end, until arguably it's too late. And so it's one of those psychological ones where arguably not a lot is happening on screen, but you're always, I think the sound has a big role to play in it, where you're just always on the edge of your seat. It's like, what is going to happen next?
We have another guest who's been waiting patiently here in the studio since the start of the show. We've been having a great chat, and it's time to bring Tisha Procopio-Stemp into it. She's the co-founder of Streams Education. And welcome to the studio.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with everybody from Brain Food Studios. And I just want to weigh in on the horror movie thing.
Sure.
And I'm probably dating myself, but I really like a good thriller, like Brooklyn was talking about, and anything Hitchcock, but particularly The Birds. And living back on the ocean now, that's particularly frightening.
I think you're right. You're right. And that's a great classic to name check for everyone. First of all, tell me a little bit about Streams Education.
So Streams Education actually started as a school that we ran for 22 years out of Las Vegas, Nevada. It was a expressive community culture school, and so it combined restorative justice principles and cultural community arts. And that was a project-based learning school where it challenged all of the conventional paradigms, allowed kids of all ages to work together, K through 12, and made learning into an art form.
Now you're here.
Now I'm here, yes, because I think that, that Newfoundland is a wonderful place to be for this. I currently work with RFNL, which is Relationships First Newfoundland and Labrador, as the Community Justice Coordinator. And in conjunction with that, I work with Rabbit Town Community Center, which I am so proud of, and they are so amazing, as community circles in the morning with an adult group, but then with a youth group that is fantastic in the evenings. And Matt and I met actually sort of through the university, through a mutual friend. Shout out to Ed Martin. Thanks, Ed, for everything that you've done for all of us, who's over at the Genesis Center now. Introduced Matt and I because we were both we're always teachers, right? I actually still teach at the university, and I was a K-12 teacher for most of my life. So we said, well, how can we get youth involved with arts if they're not getting that at the schools? And so out of their talking circles came real concerns, serious concerns that they had about school and the way it was being run and what could be better about it. So they put together a mock newscast, although they'd preferred a horror film, which is something else we can talk about in a minute, that Matt helped with, and they got to learn all about filmmaking. And it did wonderful things not only for the community, because it brought community together, and the folks that appeared in that film were not only our youth group, which is ages 13 to 17, but everybody from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade that was part of the after-school program as well.
So I guess somebody out there might be thinking filmmaking sounds like fun.
Mm-hmm.
Why could it be such an important part of my kids' education as opposed to just an interesting extracurricular?
Well, we really believe that if we infuse that inside of the curriculum, then kids have a reason to come to school every day. We did filmmaking in Las Vegas. They wrote books, they wrote films, they wrote plays. Arts were a part of the everyday curriculum. And I had to literally send people home. 7th graders that would come in with a raging fever, and I'd go, honey, you got to go home today, because their mother couldn't get them not to come to school. They want to be there. They understand the implications of applied learning in that sense. And the arts, I think, is just the best way to go.
Ultimately, through the programs you do at the Rabbitown Community Center and the children there, did you end up making a horror film?
So we are working on, well, I don't know if I would call it horror, but a podcast of legendary. So
really?
I really relate to what James is saying, only everyone is dead to begin with. So it's set in a mythical town, basically, but in Newfoundland. And the only live person is a medium who only has dead people to talk to. And they're dead people of legendary that are continually complaining about the living and just how unfair the living are to them on a regular basis. And they include, kind of global legendary like Bloody Mary, but also local Newfoundland legends, including Tate, the ghost of the Rabbitown Community Center.
Okay. Want to welcome one more guest to the show. Allison Short is the instructional coordinator at the College of the North Atlantic TV and Film Program. She's been waiting patiently on the line and listening. Good afternoon.
Hi, thanks so much for including me in this today. Very excited to be here.
We're talking about films made in particular by younger people, and you are the executive director for the Pope Youth Film Festival. I understand that's coming up fairly soon?
It is. So we actually just had our distribution sent out through NL Schools today. So all the young people listening, you're probably going to hear all about it on Monday when you get to school. But it is the 4th run of our 5th Pope Youth Film Festival. And we're very excited this year to encourage all the young people in the province to take an interest in storytelling and making those stories visual. And, of course, we have a horror category. We have 4 categories in our festival, drama, comedy, documentary, and, of course, horror, where we get a lot of very interesting submissions every year.
And in working at a festival like that, are you sort of planting the seeds for what might be the next generation of students to come through the TV and film program at the college?
Well, that is the goal. This festival is named after our founder, just as the building that we have our school in, Paul L. Pope, who a lot of people know was one of the founding members of the film industry here in Newfoundland. So, as I said, our building is named after Paul, and as is this film festival that he started himself. So, yeah, 100%. This is open to anyone ages 12 to 19. And the idea is to, just like you said, plant the seed of you can make a film. The festival is actually run by the students at the CNA TV and film program. So we've got a great social media presence that gives lots of tips and tricks to young people, and encourages them to just go out and shoot on their phone and come up with a great idea and shoot it, submit it to the festival. And we have great cash prizes for all the winners. And yeah, the idea is we were already seeing students that are here in the school now who have made submissions and won at the festivals before. We have students who won in the writing categories, the acting categories, the drama films. So it's definitely proving its worth.
For anyone who's listening and they want to find out more right away, where can they turn online?
We have a wonderful website, pyff.ca. PIF.ca. And for all of the students, young people who are in schools, like I said, there's going to be posters and stuff distributed around your school and some of the community spaces around in St. John's. And a poster's got a QR code on there, takes you to all our social medias.
Alison, thanks so much for joining us for the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That is Alison Short. She's with the College of the North Atlantic Television and Film Program. Matt, as a guy who runs his own studio that you set up specifically to introduce students and other young people to film and show them the ropes, I think anyone who, say, in the St. John's area, who sees a TV or film, a TV show or a film being shot around town, which is not that uncommon, even in this day and age when technology is getting smaller, it still looks like a huge operation. And I think some people who are really interested in film might think, this is like huge. How do I get all this tech, and how do I afford it, and how do I get all the gear I need for editing and so on? Is this something that people can do on their phones?
Oh, 100%. One of the things that we try and embrace is that DIY mindset. We want to, it's a bit of a balancing act, actually, because we want to create a bit of an immersion experience where they do get to use the fancy lights and the fancy cameras, learn about exposure settings and all that, use the clapboard where they snap and say action, and they get, into the roles and stuff like that. But at the same time, I also want them to be able to walk out of the class at the end of the day and feel empowered that they know enough or have enough ability to go and find those resources. They don't need the big fancy equipment. You can do amazing things with a phone, which just about everyone has these days, a lamp, and like a couple of curtains or blankets to make sure that you're controlling the light. Audio can be tricky sometimes, but the microphone that you have on board, or even just a hidden microphone from like a headset or something like that's plugged into the phone, can have a big impact. So it is a great. So to answer your question directly, yes, you can absolutely do it with limited resources. You don't need the big fancy equipment. Although we try and bring that in from time to time, we also have some activities where we're just like, all right, guys, everyone take out your phone, go find a spot in the building, and here's what you need to film. We're going to do a quick camera test on this lighting arrangement. And they just go and they have a ball doing those sorts of things.
So you already anticipated my next question, which was, I think by now everybody knows that you can shoot video on your phone. You can get some pretty sophisticated editing done if you know how to find the right apps to do it. But I was worried about things like sound, lighting, that kind of thing. That's not always quite as obvious, but with a little bit of practice, you can get there even with a minimum of gear.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I mentioned it earlier, it's yes and, but sometimes no but. And sometimes we have to embrace our limitations. We don't have big Hollywood budgets for these productions that the kids want to put off. And so I hate those moments where like they have this big grandiose idea and it's like, we just can't do that. But what can we do, right? If we and audio is one of those situations where if you're using the onboard camera and your subject is a good distance away from it, that's a bit of a problem with the output, right? So how do we solve that? Do we have a little like another phone with the like dictaphone app running, and then later we splice those together? So that's those sort of teachable moments. So instead of saying like, no, we can't do that, let's think of something else, we look at that problem through a solution-focused lens And that's where the kind of the curriculum kind of comes into play. Is like we need to figure out how we can sync this video with that audio. There's our lesson for next week. We're going to figure that out, and then we're going to put it into action.
Tisha, I see you nodding your head. You must often be in situations where kids come to you with tremendous big ideas, but you're able to actually help them round those ideas into something that can be done.
Absolutely. You have to give them pretty free rein in the brainstorming stage, I would say.
Absolutely.
And so Matt and I spent a long time kind of reining them in. But ultimately, they just want to get their message out there. And that's our goal, right? We say yes, and how are you going to get your message out there? Or no, but how are you going to get your message out there? And I think that the combination of Matt's really sophisticated equipment and them being able to handle that and having to be so careful and learning about everything that he was bringing in and those tech skills that they needed, but also then us editing, looking at things on the computer, letting them. My partner in Streams Education is Jamie Burfield, who is still out in Nevada right now. And we lost our phones for like days at a time because the kids were running around filming everything with our phones. And the smallest people can do that. They don't need to be teenagers. We had 8-year-olds running around, actually getting some pretty good footage.
That's great. Before we wrap up, James, tell me what you're up to next when it comes to film and video.
Right now, I've got a couple of projects in the works, mostly just working with Brain Food Studios, my job, and just getting out there, helping as best I can. I work, obviously, I'm from the filmmaking program in Stephenville. So again, shout out to Peter, shout out to Keith, but I still work with a lot of the students that are in the film program here in St. John's. So I just like to help as best I can because, there's lots of people that are looking for those opportunities, but they don't know how to get there. They don't know what to do. So whether it's me using, putting someone behind the camera, showing them how it works during one of my shoots or in front of the camera, I just love to help out. So that's mostly what I'm doing, just going from project to project.
Brooklyn, do you have ideas yet for the next one?
I'm actually working on something now. Well, I'm attempting to do a feature film. It's a reach, but I'm more doing it for the fun of it. And I told myself a few months ago I was trying to give myself something to do that would definitely challenge me because I've been making short films since I was like 8. And I was like, I'll try and do a feature film. And it's okay if it doesn't work out. It's okay if it doesn't come out how I want it to be because, and I was like, I'm just going to give myself something to try. So I've been working on that now since August, and I'm starting filming now March 1st. So it's getting close, and it's really cool. I've had a lot of amazing people helping me out with it. James has helped me. A couple of the actors in it actually was because you ended up sharing it, and they came to me then. And Matt has helped me a lot, too, just with, like, things like locations or just a bit of advice. And, Lisa also, she's helped a lot, too. She gave me a lot of advice, too. And just everyone is so amazing with helping me, and I really couldn't have done it without them.
All right. We have to let you go. But before we do, just tell us about the screening again, where and when.
The screening is at 7 p.m. on February 13th at Magic Storm Events up by the Avalon Mall. It's going to be about an hour and 30 minutes, just 6 horror short films, and I think it'll be a fun time.
All right, and you'd love everyone to get out and see them.
Yeah.
Thank you all for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Jamie Fitzpatrick. You are listening to The Signal on CBC Radio 1. We have had some great conversations over the last couple of weeks here on The Signal about things like politics and mental health and even the very personal decision on whether to have children. And we love it when listeners chime in to offer an even wider perspective on these issues. The Signal's associate producer, Arlette Lazarenko, has been keeping track of all your emails, texts, and voicemails, and she joins me now. Hello.
Hi, Jamie.
So let's start on Wednesday. That's when we hosted a big chat about the current political climate and the future of politics in this province and beyond, and a whole bunch of other things. We had a panel of very motivated young people in the studio, all of them interested in politics, all of them under the age of 40.
Yes, it was an interesting conversation, and we had some comments left by listeners, so I just wanted to hop in and read you some. One of the talking points in that show was the tone of politics. You know, how conversations can turn from very nasty and mean in arguments. On that point, we got an email from Greg Hiscock from Brigus. He is a counselor with the town of Brigus for over a decade. He writes that in the past 3 years, it has been the most stressful in his career. He says, quote, "It seems as though society as a whole have lost respect for anyone in a leadership role. The level of slander, harassment, and online trolling seems to have amplified since the COVID lockdown era. This abuse is a huge turnoff for anyone wishing to engage in municipal, provincial, or federal politics." He says he ran for the role not for money, but for love for his community. And with the current public criticism, warranted or not, he will likely not run for re-election. That was Greg Hiscock. Thank you for leaving your thoughts.
Yeah, you have to wonder who would want to run for office at any level in this day and age, given all the abuse that you can likely expect, right?
Yeah, well, it's actually during the show, one of our guests, Ben Oates, he said, the best politicians are the people who never intended to get into politics. And then on that note, we got an email from Daryl Chislett, who agrees with Ben. He writes, quote, "Yes, the best politician is one who never wanted it." And then he had a suggestion, from municipal to federal, put everyone in the country into a random draw, and these people will be the politicians. Can it work? Don't know, but worth a try. Thank you for that, Daryl.
Not sure how I'd respond if my name was pulled from the hat, but it's just an idea. Let's turn to Tuesday's show. Our topic was mental health, and in particular, how to maintain an even keel during these darkest and coldest days of winter when a lot of people get the blues.
Yes, we had a panel of mental health professionals, and it was a very powerful discussion. We got lots of comments about it, and nearing the end of the show, we got one very brave caller. She shared her frustration with the mental health system, that there wasn't enough support, and finally, at the end, she talked about basically giving up. And the panel that we had was very compassionate, and they agreed that the province has to do more and take mental health more seriously. And we got some responses from that episode. I will read you some of them. One comes from Steve Miller. He says he's a former firefighter and he is living with trauma. He says he is thankful to you, Jamie, and the guests. He says the show was, quote, engaging, emotional, educating, and powerful. Kudos to the brave caller at the end and to each of you for responding so compassionately. Thank you for tackling these complex issues in a special way, end quote. Thank you, Steve, for listening. And we got another email from Sarah. She writes, she was listening to the episode while eating lunch with her kids and mother-in-law. She says, quote, the conversation was incredibly insightful and so relatable. It felt like you were addressing exactly what many of us are going through this time of year. It was a great mix of practical tips, empathy, and expert insights. I liked how they could each slightly nudge systematic change without being too explicit or negative about it. Then Jamie, she adds, I certainly felt more connected to my community after spending my lunch with your guests today. That was really lovely to read. And then we got another email about this show. Came from Michael Burke, who was listening to the show while running on his treadmill. He writes, quote, I have a wife who has PTSD and a daughter with an eating disorder, and this was a very special episode to listen to. Someone had mentioned it, but I usually find experts and organizations discussing mental health to be lip service. But then he says, each of those three guests were excellent. Very good job to them and all involved in bringing the sensitive conversations to the public broadcast. I have sent this to my daughter's teacher and would love to see them back for a discussion in youth mental health. These are the types of people we need pushing and driving change. On my behalf and my family, thank you for normalizing these conversations, as one of your guests mentioned. Thank you, Michael, for that one. And those were the comments that we had this week. But I do have some more from last week, Jamie.
Okay, so where do we want to go next?
So last Thursday, we spoke about President Trump's tariffs, his threats of tariffs on Canadian products, and the impact it could have on our province, and how we should respond. So we got a voicemail from Daryl Goff of Gander. Take a listen.
What we got to start doing, we got to be more independent and support local rather than relying on other countries like the United States. This is what we're going to have to explore. And not only that, maybe they should take another angle in their approach. And I agree with Premier Daniel Smith. Try to work with the Americans rather than be reactive and go, like if they throw tariffs, we go back that way.
Daryl then goes on to say that Canada should try to work with Trump, remind him of partnerships we had in the past, to come to the table as friends rather than enemies.
And on a completely different subject, going back to Monday of last week, Adam hosted a show speaking to several guests who have decided they'll never have children. And they were talking about that decision and how they came to it.
Yeah, and then on that topic, we got a voicemail from Neil Banks. He had a question.
Hey there, Adam. My name's Neil Banks. Me and my wife planned on not having kids our entire lives. And one of the things I struggle with, and I just wonder if anybody else is struggling with it, just wanting to please your parents by having kids. I'm the only male on both sides of my family, and I'm not planning on having kids. And I do deal with that every day. Wondering if anyone else is feeling that way. Have a great day, y'all.
Thank you so much for all our listeners to, put feedback on the show and chatting about it. We love hearing from you.
Anything else that you want to cover before we let you go?
Well, it's not a comment, but we do have a music treat for our listeners. We got a voicemail from local artist and singer Selena Boland. She has a new song that she released, and she wanted to share it with us. So I'll let her introduce the song.
Hey, Adam, it's Selena Boland calling. I would love it if you could play my new single, Someone to Lean On. It's going to appear on my album in March, Take My Heart and Run. And this song, Someone to Lean On, is probably one of the most personal songs I've ever written. It's about feeling left behind when we don't hit life's expected milestones, things like buying a house, getting married, starting a family. But here's the truth. Everyone's journey is unique, and we shouldn't compare ourselves to others. So this song is a reminder that it's okay to take your time and trust your own rhythm. Sometimes all we need is someone to lean on.